The studio lights blazed down with an almost surgical precision, white, unforgiving, and hot enough to make the air shimmer. It wasn't the soft glow of a friendly morning show. This was interrogation, lighting merciless, stripping away any illusion, any comfort. The CNN set looked immaculate, polished mahogany table, spotless glass panel screens, glowing faintly in the background. Every reflective surface seemed to double the tension in the room, bouncing it back at the two people seated across from each other. The camera moved in a slow, steady crawl, a predator closing the distance. Its lens focused on the round table at the center, where two figures sat in rigid stillness. One figure leaned slightly forward, his jaw-tight eyes locked on his opponent like a hawk sizing up prey. The other sat back, poised, composed hands folded loosely, as if conserving energy for the right moment. Around them, the soundscape was alive in subtle ways. A faint cough from the back row, the almost imperceptible hum of overhead lights. The steady rustle of paper as aides clutched briefing notes, flipping pages without even reading them. From somewhere to the left, a chair let out a soft, uneasy creak. And then there was the murmuring, low rippling, impossible to ignore. It wasn't just conversation, it was the collective pulse of a room waiting for something to happen. This was not small talk. This was anticipation, the quiet before a storm that everyone knew was coming, but no one could predict how violent it would be when it finally broke. Matt Gaetz sat with the posture of a man who believed the room already belonged to him. His shoulders' squared chin lifted ever so slightly as if the air in the studio carried his name. The navy suit fit perfectly tailored, crisp paired with a tie that caught the light every time he moved. His voice when he spoke earlier carried that courtroom authority, deep, deliberate, the kind that doesn't just aim to be heard but to dominate. There was a confidence about him, not the quiet kind, but the type that walks into a room and assumes the upper hand before the first word is spoken. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett was a study in stillness. She didn't fidget. She didn't lean forward to match his aggression. Instead, she sat with a composed grace, her hands resting lightly on the folder in front of her. Her eyes, sharp, unblinking, tracked every move Gaetz made, like a chess player studying not just the current play, but the next three moves ahead. The calm on her face wasn't passive, it was controlled. The kind of calm that says, I've been here before and I'm ready. Two figures, two energies, one loud, forceful, and pressing forward, the other quiet, calculating, and holding the line. The tension between them didn't just fill the room, it defined it. The host leaned forward, one hand resting lightly on the desk, eyes scanning between the two guests. Her voice was calm, professional, yet under that polished delivery, there was an almost imperceptible edge. Good evening and welcome. Tonight we have with us Congressman Matt Gaetz and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett to discuss the recent infrastructure bill and what it means for the American people. It was a textbook introduction, short, neutral, balanced. But in the silence that followed, you could feel the charge in the air like static, just before a lightning strike. No one in the room, not even the audience watching from home, could have guessed how quickly that polite framing would shatter. For now, all they saw were two figures sitting across from each other in a conversation that had yet to begin. What they didn't know was that within minutes, this table would become a battlefield, and by the end, the entire narrative would flip on its head. It happened fast, too fast for the host to even react. Matt Gaetz leaned forward sharply, his palms slamming against the polished surface of the desk with a sharp thud that cut through the studio air. Papers trembled. A coffee mug shifted just enough to rattle. Every head in the audience turned at once. Name one thing you've actually accomplished. He demanded, his voice ricocheting off the studio walls, each word clipped, loaded with accusation. His finger jabbed the air in Crockett's direction, as if every syllable needed a target. The smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth wasn't friendly, it was the smile of someone convinced the next moment belonged to him. The host began to raise a hand, lips parting to regain control, but Gaetz didn't so much as glance at her. In that instant, it was clear this was no longer a moderated discussion. This was a challenge thrown down in the open, and the whole room knew there was no taking it back. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. The sharp crack of Gaetz' hand on the table might as well have been a passing breeze. Her lips curved just slightly into a smile that wasn't warm, but knowing. The kind of smile that says, I see exactly what you're trying to do, and it won't work. The camera cut to a tight close-up, her eyes steady and unblinking, locked on Gaetz without the faintest hint of intimidation. Not a twitch, not a blink. Just that calm, razor-sharp gaze, the gaze of someone who's already calculated the ending before the first move was made. Her right hand rested lightly on the folder in front of her fingers, relaxed but ready like a chess player hovering over the queen, patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to strike. The studio's noise seemed to fade in that instant. All that existed was the silent counterweight to Gaetz' booming aggression. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her stillness was the statement. A low ripple moved through the room, at first barely noticeable. It was the sound of whispered reactions, staffers leaning toward each other with quick, hushed exchanges, aides scribbling notes they hadn't planned to take. From the far corner, a cameraman adjusted his shot, the lens narrowing in on Crockett's calm face, as if even he knew something was about to happen. A stage manager, half hidden behind a curtain, tilted her head toward the monitor, eyes widening slightly. The audience wasn't loud, no gasps, no shouts, but the energy had shifted in a way that everyone could feel. It was like standing ringside watching two fighters circle each other, waiting for the first real blow to land. Every cough, every shuffle of feet, every rustle of paper seemed amplified under the weight of anticipation. You could almost hear the unspoken thought passing from row to row. The fight hasn't even started yet, but it's coming. Gaetz wasn't done, not even close. He leaned in further, voice rising with each repetition, circling back to the same accusations, like a hammer striking the same spot on the anvil. Useless in Congress. No legislative accomplishments. All talk, no results. The words came in sharp bursts, each one landing like a jab meant to bruise rather than persuade. The host tried to cut in once, twice, three times, her hand lifting, her voice weaving through his. "Congressman, please, Congressman, let's allow the Congresswoman to..." But Gaetz plowed forward, talking right over her, his sentences stacking on top of one another, until it felt less like debate and more like a verbal siege. In the control room, producers exchanged glances, their eyes darting to the countdown clock. They knew they were losing control of the segment, but pulling it back now would only heighten the drama, and the drama was gripping. Somewhere in the audience, a man shook his head while a woman in the front row crossed her arms, her eyes darting between the two combatants, wondering which one would crack first. Through the barrage of words, Jasmine Crockett remained still, almost unnervingly so. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't shake her head. Instead, she let Gaetz's voice echo through the room like distant thunder, absorbing every syllable, storing each one away. Her hand moved only once, fingers brushing the edge of her folder, turning a single page with a precision so deliberate it almost felt like a signal. The soft flip of paper cut through the air in a way that was louder than it had any right to be. Her eyes never left him. Not when his voice spiked, not when he jabbed his finger in her direction, not even when the host's voice tried and failed to break through the chaos. It was the stare of someone measuring an opponent not in anger, but in calculation. Patience radiated from her, attention like a bowstring drawn to its limit, holding ready for that one perfect moment when the arrow would fly straight and true. The host finally raised her voice, firm, measured, cutting through the noise. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said, pausing just long enough for the words to land. "You have 30 seconds to respond." 30 seconds. It wasn't an invitation, it was a clock. A blinking red timer in the minds of everyone in the room. The air seemed to thicken as if the oxygen itself had been put on hold. Every whisper in the audience went silent. The shuffling of papers stopped. Even Gaetz's hands, still poised on the desk, froze in place. The camera swept from the host to Crockett, lingering on her face, searching for the telltale sign of a flinch, a rush, a stumble. It found none. She simply straightened in her chair, her fingers resting gently on the folder before her. The same folder she'd touched only once since the show began. Somewhere in the control room, a producer leaned forward toward the monitor and whispered, "This is it." Crockett's hand moved slow, deliberate, as if she had all the time in the world. Her fingers slipped under the leather folder, and with a measured pull, she opened it. From inside, she drew out a single document. Not a stack, not a flurry, just one sheet, its edges crisp under the studio lights. As she placed it flat on the table, the camera operator seemed to sense the moment and zoomed in tight. There it was, bold streaks of yellow highlighter slashing across the text, each mark glowing under the overhead lights like neon arrows, pointing straight at the truth. The highlighted lines weren't random. They were surgical, precise, leading the viewer's eyes exactly where she wanted them to go. In the control room, a producer barked into the comms, "Stay on that shot, don't cut away." Crockett didn't look at the camera, didn't look at the host. Her eyes were locked on Gaetz as she slid the page forward, turning it so the words faced him. Her voice hadn't even spoken yet, but the message was already loud and clear. "I brought receipts and you're in them." Crockett's voice broke the silence. Not loud, not rushed, but clear enough to slice through the tension like a scalpel. One of these amendments, she began, her eyes never leaving Gaetz, was co-authored with Congressman Gaetz' own office. The words hung there for half a beat, and then the sound hit. A low collective "oh" rippled through the audience, spreading like a wave from the front row to the back. Even the host's eyes widened slightly, her hand freezing in midair, as if she'd forgotten what she was about to say. In the control room, someone muttered, "We've got gold," while another voice shouted, "Stay on, Crockett, don't cut." Gaetz' expression shifted in real time from the practiced confidence of a man in control to the quick, involuntary flicker of someone recalculating his next move. It wasn't panic, not yet, but the first visible crack had appeared. Crockett didn't press the advantage immediately. She let the silence after her words do the work, letting the audience's reactions swell, letting Gaetz sit with the weight of what she had just revealed. The camera caught it, the shift. Just moments ago, Gaetz had worn the steady, unshakable look of a man steering the conversation. Now that expression had tightened, the jaw a little more rigid, the eyes narrowing as if trying to see where the next hit would land. Crockett didn't give him long to wonder. Her hand reached back into the folder, drawing out a second document, this one thicker, pages clipped together with a bold red tab at the top. She slid the first page into the camera's view, a printed email chain, dates and timestamps clearly visible. His legislative director's name highlighted alongside her own staff signature. This, she said evenly, is the correspondence between our offices drafting the language for that amendment. A murmur rolled through the room again. Gaetz's eyes flicked down at the paper, then back up, searching for the right response. But Crockett wasn't finished. From the folder came a small flash drive in a clear plastic sleeve. "I also have the recorded committee session," she continued, "where Congressman Gaetz expressed support for this language on the record." And then the final blow. She pulled a thin printout, a transcript from the House floor debate. Highlighted in bright yellow was a line of his own words. "This amendment represents exactly the kind of bipartisan cooperation Americans deserve." It was like watching a chess game where the queen, the rook, and both bishops had just been taken in 3 moves. The room felt smaller now, the air tighter, and for the first time that night, Gaetz didn't look like the one setting the terms. The change was subtle at first, a faint shift in posture here, a measured inhale there, but the host felt it immediately. Just 10 minutes ago, Matt Gaetz had been the storm in the room, his voice the loudest, his presence filling every inch of space. Now that dominance was slipping like water spilling from a glass that had been tipped too far. The host's gaze flicked from Crockett's steady eyes to Gaetz' tightening jaw. She didn't need a producer in her earpiece to know the balance had flipped. Gaetz leaned back slightly, his voice losing that hard, slicing edge it had carried earlier. "I think," he began, "we might be overemphasizing some technical staff-level exchanges here." The words came slower now, less like bullets, more like a man choosing his footing on unfamiliar terrain. He gestured toward the papers between them, but the motion was smaller, less commanding than before, almost as if he were trying to guide the conversation back to higher ground. Still, his eyes betrayed the truth. He was no longer chasing a victory lap. He was searching for a way out of the corner. Crockett leaned forward, not aggressively, but with the measured intent of someone inviting the audience closer. Her voice lowered just slightly, the kind of tone that makes people instinctively lean in, afraid they might miss something important. "What Congressman Gaetz hasn't mentioned," she began, "is that Congress doesn't just work in front of cameras. Most of the real work, the bills, the amendments, the negotiations, happens behind the scenes." She tapped the folder gently, as if to remind everyone that what lay inside was more than just paper. It was the record. "In the last session alone," she continued, "my office successfully passed 17 amendments. 9 of those had Republican co-sponsors, colleagues who worked with me to make sure the final legislation served all of our constituents." The camera cut to Gaetz for just a beat, catching the faint shift in his eyes as the number landed. "These amendments weren't headline grabbers," she added, "but they improved oversight, streamlined regulations, and increased government accountability. Some of them," she allowed herself the faintest pause, "were even praised by members who opposed the larger bills they were attached to. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was an education, and the viewers at home were getting a rare tour of the machinery that runs Washington." The tone in the room began to shift not by much, but enough for everyone to feel it. The sharp edges in Gaetz's voice softened, replaced by a cautious, measured cadence. He no longer spoke over the host. He no longer rushed his points. I can agree, he said slowly, that there are moments of bipartisan cooperation. But those moments are exceptions, not the rule. Crockett nodded once, not as an admission of defeat, but as a recognition that the conversation had entered a different phase. And that's exactly why we should highlight them. She replied, because the public deserves to know Congress can function even when the headlines suggest otherwise. The host glanced between them, clearly relieved to see sentences being completed instead of collided. Still, there was no mistaking the underlying tension. This was not reconciliation. This was two professionals testing the limits of how far they could acknowledge common ground without surrendering their core positions. The audience leaned in, sensing the difference. This wasn't the verbal street fight they'd started watching. It was now something rarer, two political adversaries locked in disagreement, but speaking in a way that let viewers glimpse the machinery behind the curtain. Crockett leaned in slightly, her voice steady, deliberate, not to score a point but to land a truth. This, she said, gesturing between herself and Gaetz, is what I call principled disagreement, holding firm to your values while recognizing that practical cooperation is how we actually get things done. Her eyes swept briefly toward the audience, then back to the camera as if speaking to the millions beyond the studio walls. Congress is not just a battlefield, she continued. Yes, there are fights, big ones. But between those battles, there are moments where we look across the aisle, see a common need, and work together to meet it. Those moments don't make headlines, but they make a difference. In the control room, a producer nodded quietly. This wasn't the soundbite they expected, but it was the kind that sticks with viewers long after the show ends. Across the table, Gaetz didn't interrupt. For the first time that evening, he simply listened. It didn't take long. By the time the segment ended and the credits rolled, the clip had already begun its second life online. Within an hour, it was everywhere, Twitter threads breaking down each exchange. Facebook posts with captions like, "Why don't we see this on the news more often?" TikTok edits zooming in on Crockett's steady gaze as she slid the highlighted document across the desk. The view count ticked upward in real time, hundreds of thousands, then millions. Comment sections lit up. This is how you do politics, facts, not noise. More of this, less of the shouting matches. And the question repeated over and over in different words but the same meaning. Why doesn't the media show moments like this more often? Cable news producers noticed. Even rival networks clipped the exchange for their own panels, some praising Crockett's composure, others framing it as a rare glimpse of bipartisanship worth studying. It was no longer just a segment on a Tuesday night show, it was a conversation starter, a piece of political theater that for once left the audience talking about substance instead of spectacle. In the days that followed, the ripples turned into waves. For Matt Gaetz, the clip became a double-edged sword. Among his staunch supporters, some defended him, framing the exchange as just politics. But others, particularly independents and moderate voters, questioned the aggressiveness without the follow-through. Behind closed doors, advisors urged a shift in tone. The next time he appeared on television, his delivery was noticeably different. Still sharp, still combative when needed, but with more careful pacing and an effort to appear engaged rather than purely confrontational. For Jasmine Crockett, the moment was a breakthrough. Pundits began referring to her as the receipts player, the lawmaker who doesn't just argue, but arrives with evidence in hand, ready to turn the tide of a conversation with a single page of proof. Her office leaned into the image, posting clips of her past committee appearances, where she'd done the same on a smaller scale. Requests for interviews surged. Campaign donations saw a quiet bump from viewers who said they valued facts over theatrics. It was more than just a viral moment. It had redrawn, if only slightly, the way each politician was perceived, and both knew it would shape how they played their next public hand. If there was one lesson etched into the minds of everyone who watched that night, it was this. Never underestimate your opponent, especially when they have the receipts. In politics, confidence is currency, but evidence is a weapon that cuts through bravado like glass through paper. Gaetz entered the studio certain he controlled the narrative. For the first half of the segment, it seemed he did. But the moment Crockett placed that highlighted document on the desk, the terms of battle shifted. The takeaway was clear for any elected official watching from home. You can win a headline with a sharp one-liner, but you can lose an entire argument in seconds if your opponent arrives prepared, documented, and unshakable. In the age of viral clips and instant replay, facts aren't just part of the debate. They are the debate. Ignore that and you're not just risking embarrassment, you're handing your opponent the moment that will define you. For the public, this moment was more than just political theater. It was a reminder. A reminder that what we see on TV is often the most dramatic slice of a much bigger, messier reality. Too often, viewers get caught up in the clash of personalities, the sound bites designed to provoke outrage, the raised voices that make for good television. But real governance, it happens in the quiet in committee rooms, in negotiations and pages of legislation no one ever reads. The lesson is simple but powerful. Don't let yourself be seduced by the show. Look for the facts, ask for the data, demand the documents. If a politician makes a claim, the most important follow-up question isn't how loud can they say it? It's can they prove it? When Crockett pulled out her folders, she didn't just silence Gaetz. She gave the public a live demonstration of how truth looks in the face of performance. And in a world where media often chooses conflict over clarity, it's up to the viewers to seek the clarity themselves. Crockett slowly closed the thick folder, the sound of paper against leather echoing in the hushed studio. She didn't look at Gaetz. She didn't look at the host. Her eyes went straight into the lens, straight into the living rooms of millions of viewers. Her voice was calm, almost quiet, but every syllable landed like a hammer. Facts will always outlast the noise. For a moment, no one moved. No rustle of papers, no cough from the audience, no whispered chatter from the staff. Just silence, the kind of silence that doesn't happen often in politics. The camera lingered on her face for one last beat before fading to black. In that instant, it was no longer about party lines or political points. It was about truth standing its ground against spectacle. As the credits rolled and the deep, resonant music swelled, viewers at home knew they hadn't just watched another shouting match. They had witnessed a chess game, a battle of preparation, patience, and precision. And in that battle, the evidence had spoken louder than any voice in the room. Never underestimate the power of preparation and truth. In a world full of noise, opinions, and personal attacks, facts are your strongest defense. Patience and calmness can disarm even the loudest opponent. It's not always about who talks the most, it's about who comes armed with proof when it matters most. If you believe in uncovering the truth, in seeing beyond the political theater, and in hearing the stories the mainstream media won't show, you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Join us here on Mr. Exposed Stories, where facts outlast the noise.